First off, I just want to say that Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse is an amazing movie. I don't want to come off as some dude who's looking at everything intending to criticize it. I did genuinely love this movie, and I remember vividly the night that I saw Into the Spider-Verse in theaters. After 5 years of waiting, I, as well as seemingly everyone else, can say that it was worth it. From the animation styles, to the story, to the acting, it was clear how much work went into the movie, and I cannot wait for the third one. That being said, there was one issue that I had to keep thinking over, because I couldn't quite pin down what this movie thinks about the police. It is a Spider-Man movie, so it has some elements of Copaganda by virtue of being a superhero film, but those typically take a very clear stance on one side or the other, whereas this one seems to kind of take a centrist stance on the issue. For those unaware, Copaganda refers to anything that portrays the police in a good light, often making them out to be necessary to prevent evil and upselling their importance while downplaying the bad qualities, namely all the abuse and the crimes they commit, often blaming a few bad individuals while still maintaining that the system is necessary. Superhero stories, most of the time, contribute to this by having the superhero take on the role of the cop. The hero has more power and the moral authority that comes with being the protagonist. They either kill the villain or take them into the police, at times even working with the police, and on the rare occasion one of them has to deal with a corrupt cop. It is always framed as just one bad apple, and not a systemic issue. Taking a look at the villains, more often than not, they're poor, sick, crazy, or angry, and wanting to either enact change or revenge. Now, when it comes to Spider-Verse, its opinion seems to be very lukewarm, and I want to discuss it because I think it's interesting how in some aspects this movie does try to actually make a stand, but in others it just gets held down by superhero tropes. Interestingly enough, most of my criticism about the good and the bad are split pretty evenly between two characters, so I'm going to start off with the character of Captain Stacy, Gwen's father. I don't remember if he was in the last part at all, but the story goes that one day when Peter Parker, Gwen's friend, dies in an accident, he saw her be with him and thinks she killed Peter. Since then, he's been obsessed with bringing Spider-Woman down, and it's begun to break their relationship apart. One day, after a building collapses, he corners Spider-Woman with his gun, and she reveals her secret identity to her father. The human in him comes out for a bit, but eventually the cop takes over and he tries to arrest his own daughter. I think it's interesting that they do briefly show that he is conflicted about arresting his daughter, that maybe deep down he knows it wasn't her, before that authoritative, I need to follow orders mindset comes back. Anyway, Gwen leaves that altercation, only to be caught sneaking out of a window quite a while later. They talk, and Gwen explains her need to continue being Spider-Woman, to not lose more friends, and to belong. And then, her dad just quits being a cop. Without resistance, he realizes that the only way he can protect his daughter, to allow her to continue being who she needs to be, is if he wasn't a cop. I do like the idea that to be a good parent, he needs to stop being a police officer, and I do think it would serve as an effective ending for a story. But unfortunately, this movie seems to do what a lot of other movies do, where it admits to the faults in the police and the system, but refuses to commit to the conclusion of those points, and rather just sits in this weird place where it knows that there are problems, but doesn't acknowledge that anything can be done. Gwen's final conversation with her father was going well until she said the line, "I know you wear the badge so someone who shouldn't, wouldn't," or something like that. It admits that there are some people who abuse their power, but then steps back and says, but not him, he's a good guy, again relying on the just a few bad apples argument. It leaves the Gwen and Captain Stacy storyline in a state where its outcome is don't be a cop, because if I was, I would need to arrest and hurt this person that I know isn't doing any harm, but doesn't stop to examine why a person in that position is forced to hurt someone who isn't doing harm, or allows those bad apples to have so much power in the first place. Moving on to the second character, Jefferson Davis, or Miles' dad, and you find that the movie seems to be just a plain old school portrayal of police without any kind of thought put into it. I want to analyze him in parts because he and Miles Morales / Spider-Man have kind of separate relationships with him. As a father, he seems to be really good. He's overbearing and affectionate, he cares about his son's future, and makes an effort to spend time with him and listen to him. He can be angry at times and not know what to say, but nobody's perfect, and I think a lot of people can relate to having someone like Jeff as a dad. I also think his relationship to Miles would be realistic if it weren't for him being a cop, and I think here's where Spider-Man comes in. Because Spider-Man is essentially just a super cop, he and Jeff work together, taking down villains, sometimes functioning even as partners. And that dynamic could work for Spider-Man, if this was like the MCU's Spider-Man, and they'll get to that in a second. But with Miles, it feels like there's a side to this character that isn't being talked about. It seems to me that as a young Afro-Latino man growing up in Brooklyn, Miles would have a more complex relationship with the police, especially having one as a father. Even through his relationship with Uncle Aaron, who clearly did feel some type of way about the police, it seems unrealistic that Miles would be as enthusiastic and accepting of the police and his father as he is. Even if you factor in the fact that he doesn't have an immigrant experience and the family is at least in a decent place financially, it still doesn't prevent him from having or being exposed to these experiences of police brutality. Lastly, I want to briefly talk about the villains of these movies. Spider-Man villains and their motivations can be a mixed bag, and it really is because sometimes movies are trying too hard to inflate their own importance and be about something that they just aren't. It's okay to be a superhero movie as long as you're doing it well. For example, let's look at the villains in the Raimi trilogy, their motivations, and their outcomes. First off, Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is a rich guy who experiments on himself with chemicals that make him go crazy, and eventually, while drunk on power, he eventually kills himself. Doc Ock is a scientist whose experiment goes wrong and takes over his mind. Once he's in control again, he sacrifices his life and puts a stop to all the destruction. Sandman is a poor guy who uses powers gained in an accident to steal money and pay for the American healthcare needed to take care of his dying daughter, and at the end of the movie, he's allowed to return to them. Green Goblin and Doc Ock use general concepts like he's crazy now to explain their villains away, and while Sandman did have a real-life excuse to be stealing, his character gets away with it and is empathized with. In the MCU, however, both Vulture and Mysterio are given in-depth backstories that relate to victims of real-life corruption in the system, both of them being scammed or losing money because of the actions of billionaire Tony Stark. However, the analysis of this problem pretty much stops before it starts in these movies, because this real-life suffering is used as nothing more than something relatable the audience can build these generic villains out of, but doesn't go as far as to ask, why were these people pushed to this position and how do we stop it? It just informs the audience that these people with these problems are the villains, and actually trying to change things is evil. If the movie isn't going to use its platform to actually talk about the issues it's portraying, it shouldn't be using those issues as the reason bad people do bad things. The Spiderverse movies seem to be going the Raimi way of writing villains, which is definitely a good thing. Kingpin had a motivation that was more rooted in human emotions and not some societal influence, which made his refusal to let go and his defeat a nice ending for the character, because the movie has no more obligations to his themes and the storyline is concluded. All in all, this movie is still amazing. You should check it out. I just still haven't made up my mind about this one aspect of it, although maybe they're laying the groundwork for a discussion that could take place in part 2. I've been really enjoying these movies and the character of Miles Morales. You may even call him the Barack Obama of the MCU, as this New Yorker article puts it. Anyway, even with all the people that definitely died when that tower collapsed in Mumbattan, their kill counts are not nearly the same. I don't have much else to say, so enjoy the rest of your day, and peace.